all of you. How are you all? I hope all of you are doing great. I'm Sri Lakshmi and I'll be taking this course for you today, and we'll be having a look at the ages of English literature and the chronology of certain events that falls under the ambit of English literature in today's class. So without much further ado, let's begin. As far as the ages of English literature are concerned, various classifications abound. For our purpose of convenience and for the merit of examination, we have actually divided it into 7 different categories, and those are as follows. It begins with the age of Chaucer, follows to the Elizabethan age, and then on to the Caroline and Restoration ages, following the Augustan age. Thereby we have the Romantic age, the Victorian age, and finally winding off with the modern age. So this is the 7-tier demarcation that I have done, considering the point of view of exam as well as for the purpose of convenience. Now, let me tell you right at the onset that the age of Chaucer actually falls in the Middle Ages. So when we are talking of the age of Chaucer, we are actually talking of the medieval period in the history of England. And therefore, that would give us some years back, right? We will get some centuries before Chaucer, and that's actually called pre-Chaucerian ages. And that will be taken care of once we talk of English poetry and other literary works which exclusively talks of pre-Chaucerian ages. Now with that background, let's start with the first one, that is the age of Chaucer. The age of Chaucer dates from 1340 and it ends in 1400. Why so? Because Geoffrey Chaucer was born in the year of 1340 and he dies in the year 1400. Therefore, the span is of 60 years. Now, something can be rightly said about him. Yes, what is that? He is the person who found English a dialect and he left it a language. Now here comes the persona who is to give us the English language and all of its poetry, even though in its nascency. Now when we talk of any literary age, it's important that we talk of the political and historical context as well. Now that includes the reign of 3 English monarchs. And who all are these? This includes Edward III, Richard II, and Henry IV. Now, on one side, the picture is really bright and happy, and on the other side, we have a very dark side of the picture. So therefore, it is equally an age wherein voyages were done and nationality was its peak. But at the same time, there is another side of the picture wherein the people of the lower classes really found it difficult to live. The masses were living in deplorable poverty and misery. Now, coupled with that comes epidemic. Epidemic after epidemic ravaged the country during this particular time. Now, of which the most severe would be the Fierce Plague. The Fierce Plague actually appeared in the year in 1349. It is called Black Death because it swept away much of the population in England. Why? Because it didn't end with 1349, it kept reappearing. It reappeared in the years 1362, 67, and 70 with the same ferocity, taking away half of the population of England and much of the glory of England. Now, it is at this juncture that Geoffrey Chaucer enters the scene, and he is ideally one of the best writers to quote. That's why the age in itself is named after him. Now, after this plague comes the period of unprecedented degradation, hypocrisy, and corruption. Now, this corruption is very much visible in the institutions of the church and the clergy. Remember that religious institutions had a higher say in power and other things, and politics is, of course, in those times. Therefore, the worst face of the church and clergy can be seen those times, which are accurately mentioned by Geoffrey Chaucer in his major works. So what are his major works? Of course, it is the Unfinished Canterbury Tales, the Legends of Good Women, the Parliament of Falls, the Romance of the Rose, the Book of the Duchess, etc. We also have a few more writers belonging to this particular age. Who all are they? It is William Langland, who wrote the famous work Pius the Plowman. We have John Gower, who wrote Confessio Amantis. We also have William Dunbar, John Skelton, Gavin Douglas. They are called Scottish Chaucerians. So while Chaucer was in England, A group of similar vein writers were there in Scotland in the British Isles, therefore they are called as Scottish Chaucerians. Now remember, this is also the age in which Wycliffe and Tyndale also gives us the New Testament and the Bible. Moving on, we have the Elizabethan age or the age of Shakespeare. Now this actually spans from the period of 1558 to 1625. The Elizabethan age is rightly called as the golden age in English literature. England had touched the high watermark during this particular age. As you can see, it is called Elizabethan age. Why? Because Queen Elizabeth I was reigning the throne of England during this particular age. Now, the most important or striking aspect of this age is that it is the age of Renaissance. The term Renaissance is a French word which means rebirth or revival. And what revival are we talking of here? We are talking of the revival of classical Greek and Italian art, literature, and culture that actually reached England through Germany and France. So therefore, the Greek and Latin models began to be imitated in England during this particular time period. Now, when we talk of Elizabethan age, we also need to mention that it is also called the age of Reformation. Why Reformation? Because it sought to rescue religion from the age-old superstitions and unnecessary rituals. So that's why age of Reformation also coincides with the Elizabethan age or the age of Shakespeare. So remember, you need to make sure that you keep Renaissance in mind because questions on Renaissance can be asked and also the questions on Reformation. Now, the spirit of Renaissance was not confined to, reviving Greek art and imitating them, but it was also confined to, it rather extended to new discoveries and exploration of new lands, the spirit of voyages, the spirit of adventures, the spirit of intense patriotism, all that can be held to Renaissance. Now, as far as the major writers of this particular age goes, of course, we have William Shakespeare because he is ideally the most important and prominent writer during the Elizabethan age. We have other writers like Sir Philip Sidney, Edmund Spenser, Ben Jonson, Christopher Marlowe, etc. Now, Edmund Spenser has written one of the major works which talks of Fairy Queen. And who is the Fairy Queen here? It is none other than Queen Elizabeth I, Gloriana as she is being referred to. He has also authored the Shepherd's Calendar, which talks of certain eclutes. Actually, 12 of those eclutes are mentioned in the Shepherd's Calendar. Then Amority, which is a collection of love sonnets. We have 89 love sonnets in Amority, and Epithalamion. Epithalamion is actually a wedding hymn that is dedicated to his wife, Elizabeth Boyle, on their wedding day. And then comes Sir Philip Sidney. Sir Philip Sidney has authored an apology for poetry that is in response to Stephen Gossen's School of Abuse and Arcadia. Arcadia is actually one important book on which you can later see that when we talk of the novel, Samuel Richardson actually takes up the idea of Pamela from Arcadia. Then we have the major writer Ben Jonson, who has authored the comedy of humors. So as we all know, there are 4 humors in human body that an up and a certain amount of higher or lower proportion of those humors can cause some sort of anomaly in human body. So what are the 4 humors? It's blood, then we have phlegm, then yellow bile and black bile. So Ben Jonson talks of those in his comedy of humors. So what are those? There are examples like every man in his humor, every man out of his humor, the silent women, then Epoussin or the silent women, etc. Another major writer to talk of in the Elizabethan age is Christopher Marlowe, or Kit Marlowe as he is ideally referred to. He gave us the tragical history of Dr. Faustus, Tamburlaine the Great, Edward II, the Jew of Malta, the tragedy of Dido, etc. So these are the prominent figures of writers that comprises Elizabethan age, and of course we have William Shakespeare on the scene, who gave us a lot of sonnets and a lot of tragedy comedies and tragicomedies. Now proceeding further, we have the Caroline and Restoration ages. So who is that guy in the picture that you're seeing? It is Oliver Cromwell. Now, a little bit about the history of England during this time. The English Civil War was going on from 1648 to 1640, 1642 to 48. Now, why is it? Who are the opponents of this English Civil War? So actually, it was James the First who was in the throne of England in Caroline and Restoration ages. So it is he that who ruled from 1603 to 1625. Now in 1625, Charles the First ascends the throne. So his reign is from the year 1625 to 49. Now, when we are reaching to almost 49 or 48, we see that there is actually a clash between these two sets of people who are the royalist as represented by Charles I, and then the other side we have the parliamentarians. Parliamentarians are called as roundheads, and they are the people who advocated for the idea of a commonwealth. Now, when Charles I is put off the throne and when he is executed, another government is established in 1649 under the able leadership of Oliver Cromwell. So that particular period when Cromwell was on the throne is called as the it is called as the Commonwealth, and this period is also called as the interregnum in English history. So the British interregnum lasted from 1649 to 1660. Why does it come to an end in 1660? Of course, Oliver Cromwell passes away in 1658, and that's why we see that the decline or the finishing of Oliver Cromwell's Commonwealth in 1660. Now, there is another person on the scene, that is Charles II. Now, where was he all this time? So, when the Commonwealth is established by Cromwell, Oliver Cromwell, Charles II had actually fled to France. Okay, so now he returns from France, and when he makes the return, he is definitely ascended to the throne in 1660, but he is carrying all the foppish manners and fashion that he learned and so in France. So now you will see that the period is rife with a culture that is very much on the lines of French fashion and manners. That's why the period of Caroline and Restoration ages marks the comedy of manners. So comedy of manners is basically a dramatic comedy that satirizes the manners and affectations of contemporary society. And which manners are we talking of here? The foppish French manners. Now, the French manners or in culture were considered as outlandish and deplorably having very low moral values. So these were steadily incorporated in the British codes as well as in the society when Charles II was restored to the throne. So these low cultural and moral values and manners are depicted by these particular writers who wrote the comedy of manners. So therefore, the literature of this period focuses on the comedy of manners. And who all are these writers and their major works? William Wycherley has depicted comedy of manners in his Country Wife, and William Congreve in The Way of the World, Oliver Goldsmith in She Stoops to Conquer, Richard Brinsley Sheridan's The School for Scandal, and The Rivals are some examples of comedy of manners. We'll be seeing the comedy of manners in detail when we talk of English drama. But remember that these are the major writers, and the literature of this period is marked with the comedy of manners. Now we have the Augustan age. Now, the term Augustan or the Augustan age in English literature is basically the 18th century. So we are talking about the period of 1700s. So 1700s translates to the 18th century, and we are talking of that particular age when we are talking of the Augustan age. Now, in the English literature, this age is actually the neoclassical age, and this age is also called the age of Pope and Johnson, the age of Alexander Pope and Dr. Samuel Johnson. It is also called the age of reason. Why? We'll see soon. But before that, we need to keep in mind that the term Augustan is initially applied to literature of the 18th century as a term of high praise. Why? Because as you see, who was Augustus? Augustus was one of the Latin emperors who ruled the Roman Empire. Therefore, the literature in Latin was strife and full with praise and all of that glory during Augustine's reign. That's why the epithet Augustan is applied to the neoclassical school in English literature as well. Now, What happens in this age is that the Greek and Latin poets and their works were really imitated in England. Now, what is the peculiarity of this work? As I said, it is the age of reason. It is the age of reason because the poetry or the writings of this age is marked by a shift in what is being written about. So here we have a literature, or here we have literatures that conspicuously lacks in emotion, imagination, and passion. Therefore, the literature is largely satirical and it applies more to our brain than to our hearts. So that's the major shift that we see here. Because in Elizabethan and the previous ages, we can see that there is an abundance in imagination, passion, love, romance, etc. in the works. We see a decline and we see a sharp contrast of that in the Augustan age. Now, when you are writing literature that is highly didactic and satirical, what forms would you incorporate? You would incorporate a poetic diction. It needs to stick to something, and the technique employed by the writers is the heroic couplet. So that's why heroic couplet is the mode in which these writers wrote their work, and this is largely satirical or didactic. It is actually the intelligence playing upon the surface of life. And therefore, you can note that the poetry or the writings of this age is one of arguments, or it could be a satire on politics, or it can even be a satire on personalities. And sometimes it even got to a very personal level. Now, it also deals with town life rather than the rural life or nature. Therefore, in the search for decency, good sense, elegance, and mannerism, the poets confined themselves to town life, and which people were targeted? The aristocratic people. Therefore, their outlook was very much circumscribed to coffee houses and drawing rooms. So, if a question is asked as to in which age the coffee house culture flourished or the drawing room culture flourished, it is the 18th century, the age of prose and reason of Alexander Pope and Johnson. Now, these are the important authors and their major works. So, of course, if it is called the age of Pope and Johnson, it would be the age of Alexander Pope. And which are his major works? The Rape of the Lock, which is a mock epic. Then we have Pastorals, Windsor Forest, the Dunciad, etc. Then we have Dr. Samuel Johnson. Now, Samuel Johnson is a man of letters. He is even credited with the first dictionary of the English language in 1775. Now we have Jonathan Swift, Daniel Defoe, who wrote Robinson Crusoe, then Joseph Addison and Richard Steele, who were the publishers of certain dailies, The Spectator, etc. So that's all about Augustan age. Consider the fact that this is largely satirical and heroic couplet was employed, and the major writers and their works. Moving on, we have the Romantic age. You can see the picture of lyrical ballads with a few other poems on the screen. So, the Romantic age actually dates from 1798 to 1837. Now, why the year 1798? 1798 because this was the year in which Lyrical Ballads was published. Now, Lyrical Ballads is co-authored by two writers, William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge. So that's why the Lyrical Ballads has certain poems written by William Wordsworth and rest of the poems authored by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. So 19 of those were penned down by William Wordsworth and the rest 4 were given by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Now, the preface to Lyrical Ballads actually serves as the first preamble to Romantic theory of poetry and its appreciation. But remember the fact that we actually have had Romantic pieces of writing much before the Romantic age, whereas the critical appreciation of Romantic poetry was not something that English people were not accustomed to. So their customization or acquaintance, the first-hand acquaintance with how a literary work, a Romantic work could be evaluated on literary merits was given in Lyrical Ballads, actually in the preface to the Lyrical Ballads. So that's why Lyrical Ballads and the year and the preface to it becomes important. Now, two characteristic terms are going to be the striking aspects of this age: Romantic Revival and Romantic Revolt. Why it is called romantic revival? Because it sought to revive the poetic ideals of Elizabethan age. And what are those ideals? Love, beauty, emotion, imagination, a love for nature, pantheism, etc. So all these ideals were revived in the romantic age. So that's why we call it romantic revival. And remember that the previous age that we had, the Augustan age, it was one of complete reason and logic, and therefore no scope for imagination or beauty or passion could be found. Whereas we see that now we are actually retaining or bringing in back all those elements which we once saw in the Elizabethan age. Now, another term to note down here is romantic revolt. The age of romanticism is also called romantic revolt because it kind of revolted against the ideals of Augustan school of poetry. Now, what were the ideals of Augustan school of poetry? It is satirical, it is didactic, and it conspicuously lacks in freedom and imagination. Therefore, we have these two terms that actually talks a lot of romantic age. It is romantic revival on one hand, it also revolves on the other hand. Now, as far as the writers of this age goes, we can classify them into two groups. We have the early romantics and then we have the later romantics. So early romantics are that ones who actually brought forth the idea of romanticism with the lyrical ballads and the preface. So this includes William Wordsworth, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, Robert Southey, etc. And then we have the later romantics, which includes Shelley, Keats, Lord Byron, etc. Now remember, Walter Scott can also be incorporated in the category of early romantics. Now, a term called lake poets, which is normally used in literature, also comes in the early romantics. So who all are the lake poets? It's Wordsworth, Coleridge, and Robert Southey. They three are called the lake poets of English literature. Now we have certain works here. The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. Who has written that work? His name is not given here. It's actually William Blake who authored The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. Now William Blake is actually a transitionary poet because he actually takes in at that time when the Romantic age is just beginning, and he also falls under the category wherein the Augustan school of poetry is just coming to a close. So he is one person who actually sees this beautiful transition from the age of logic and reason to the Romantic age. So then we have the lyrical ballads, co-authored by William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Then Coleridge's greatest prose work, Biographia Literaria. Then the various odes by Shelley, Keats, etc. and Waverley novels. Now, who is the author of Waverley novels? It's none other than the early romantic writer, Walter Scott. Now we have reached the Victorian age. So the age rightly points to a monarch. And who is this monarch at the throne of England at this particular time? It is none other than Queen Victoria. This age spans from 1837 to 1901. Now, in terms of national glamour and glory, pride, patriotism, progress, and prosperity, Victorian age was very much tantamount to the Elizabethan age. The British Empire had expanded so much proverbially that the sun never set in the British Empire. Now it covers the 1837 to 1901 because the year of accession of Victoria to the throne of England is in the year 1837. Now, the striking feature of this age is, of course, the conflict between religion and science. So there was ceaseless conflict between the two. Religion, as you already know, is sustained and supported by faith, while science was bred and supported by logic, reason, and objective proof. Therefore, the tenets of religion and faith could not be proved, and therefore, as accepted by science, it challenges so many things. Now, science even challenged the religious authority of certain texts, the very existence of God, the creation of universe, and so many predominant questions. Therefore, the authority of Bible, the utility of the church, all those elements began to be questioned and challenged. Therefore, this conflict between religion and science was clearly visible in the literature and clearly visible in the writings of this age. However, I told you in terms of national glamour, this is an age that is very much tantamount to the previous one, the Elizabethan age. Now, England had its colony that is spread in the globe from east to west. Now, Victoria also becomes the Empress of India in the year 1876. Now, the major authors during this particular age includes Alfred Lord Tennyson, Robert Browning, Matthew Arnold, D.G. Rossetti, Charles Dickens, Thomas Hardy, etc. Alfred Lord Tennyson was in fact a poet laureate of England, and he has authored major works, poems chiefly lyrical. Then my favorite poem, Ulysses, all are authored by Alfred Lord Tennyson. We have Robert Browning, who is a pioneer of dramatic monologues. That's a kind of poetry that is in the form of a monologue plus a dramatic version. So that's a dramatic monologue. We have Matthew Arnold, who wrote Dover Beach, and D.G. Rossetti, who was also a painter and a sculptor. Now, some of the important works of this age is The Charge of the Light Brigade. And who has authored this? The Charge of Light Brigade is authored by Alfred Lord Tennyson during the Crimean War. Then Sordello. Sordello is a very famous dramatic monologue of Robert Browning. And what does it talk of? It talks of a little known Italian painter. He has also authored Rabi bin Esra. And I quote the lines from here. Grow old with me, the best is yet to be, the last of life for which the first was made. Then Dover Beach by Arnold, Scholar Gypsy again by Arnold. Then we have Hard Times, Tess of the Doubles by Hardy, etc. So these are some of the major writers and their writings. Now finally, we are drawing to a close of the literary ages, and we will be winding with which age? The modern age. So the modern age actually spans from the year 1901 to 2000s. So this age is sometimes also called postmodernist age, but that mostly applies in the context of literary criticism. As far as the features of this particular age goes, it is very much realistic literature that is produced. Why realistic? Because we see that there is a deviation. Now, science have questioned many of the creations, including religion. Therefore, the realistic mode of writing was investigated upon, and writers really marks a shift in their writings of previous poems and phrases to realistic literature. Now, this is one set of literature that explores human psyche and consciousness, and it also emphasizes on mind rather than external elements. So here you are looking within, and therefore all those elements that relates to the mind is being taken care of in this age. This age also uses the stream of consciousness technique as penned down by Virginia Woolf. Some of the major authors of this time includes George Bernard Shaw, John Galsworthy, James Joyce, Virginia Woolf, etc. So as you know, G.B. Shaw and Galsworthy are some of the major playwrights of this age who wrote realistic plays. And their major works include Pygmalion of J.B. Shaw, Strife of John Galsworthy, Dubliners by James Joyce, The Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man again by John Joyce, Orlando, and A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf. So with that, we have come to actually a close of the ages of English literature. Now what we have in store is the chronology of important events. Now CUET has a way of asking questions related to years. So therefore I have picked and chosen some years which would be of relevance in the history of England and in English literature. And I have marked which are the events that happened in that particular ages. So make sure that you by heart this age. Even if you mug up, it's fine, because at the end of the day, your purpose or your aim is to answer the questions that appears in the exam. So we'll begin with 1066, that is, the age in which Norman conquest took place. And what happens there? William, the Duke of Normandy, invades England and he becomes the king. Then we had the year of 1170, wherein Thomas à Becket, the Archbishop of Canterbury, is murdered in the cathedral by King Henry II's soldiers. So this is actually depicted by T.S. Eliot in one of his plays. And which is that play? Murder in the Cathedral. 1380, the first translation of the Bible in English by John Wycliffe is rendered. In 1381, we have the Peasants' Revolt led by Wat Taylor. Now remember that this is one of the first instances of a rebellion in England, that is the Peasants' Revolt. In 1453, we see that something is coming to a close. And what is that? It is the 100 Years' War. So actually the 100 Years' War spans more than 100 years. It actually begins in the year of 1337 and ends in 1453. So the 100 Years' Wars was fought between England and France. The belligerents are England and France. 1456 is the year in which Gutenberg's Bible is published in Germany, and that's one initial publication of those times. In 1476, you have the same printing press being given to England or being established in England. And who does that? It's William Caxton who establishes the first printing press in England. And then we have the first bestseller in the year 1485. That is, you need to find out which is the bestseller that happens in the year 1485. It is Thomas Malory's Mort de la Author. In 1578, you have the opening of the theatre, England's first. So it is the theatre, and that is England's first theatre. 1611 marks the publication of the King James or the authorized version of the Bible. 1642 to 48, as we already spoke, we have the English Civil War, and Commonwealth is established under Oliver Cromwell in 1649. 1660, restoration of Charles II, who has actually fled to France. 1665, the Great Plague of England. 1666, the Great Fire of England. And remember, Christopher Wren is the architect who was brought to rebuild the city. 1688, we have the Glorious or the Bloodlust Revolution, wherein King James is removed from the throne and Mary is ascended to the throne, Queen Mary the First. 1789, French Revolution. 1833, slavery abolished in British colonies. Now, one more year that you should be understanding here is 1776, which is the year of the US Declaration of Independence. 1837, Queen Victoria becomes the Queen. The Victorian Age starts. 1859, ceaseless conflict between religion and science. Especially, it gains prominence after the publication of Charles Darwin's The Origin of the Species. 1870, Education Acts makes schooling compulsory for children aged 5 to 13. And in 1899, we have the establishment of Irish National Theatre in Dublin by the Irish writers. And who all are this? W.B. Yeats, J.M. Gregory, etc. So, you can see the picture of Irish National Theatre here. So that's all for today. So make sure you follow the literary ages. Make sure you also make note of the chronology of important events. So with that, we are winding up this session. I hope you found it beneficial and you will be able to draw some key takeaway and some value addition out of this. Thank you so much, all of you.